Sometimes the hardest thing about getting rid of an object isn't about the object at all. It's admitting that the season connected to that item is over. And that brings with it grief. And this is true even when the season was beautiful, maybe especially when the season was beautiful. There's going to be grief there. Well, there's a plastic bin in my basement that I have moved probably 37 times, at least. I'm not exaggerating either. I could probably prove it. I could probably track the number of times that I have picked it up and I've looked at it and I've said, I need to do something with this. And then I put it right back down in the exact same spot. Now, let me tell you about what's in that bin. In that bin are baby clothes, and they're not baby clothes from my youngest either. Most of the baby clothes that are in there are from my oldest. That's where they originated from. There's the onesies, and there's the going home from the hospital outfit, and there's the little hat, right? The one that used to fit on a head that was the size of a grapefruit. And now it belongs to a person who is off with her own home and her own children. I don't need these clothes. I'm not having any more babies who are going to be wearing them. Nobody is asking me for them. And still, every single time I walk past that bin, something in me says, nope, not dealing with that yet. And so today, I don't want to talk to you about how to declutter your house. You already know how decluttering works. You know about the 3 piles that everyone talks about, the keep, donate, trash piles, right? And if you've ever listened to me talk about clutter, you know the secret sauce that's found in the not now pile, right? It's a beautiful thing. But I know you. You've watched the shows. You've done the decluttering challenges. You've Marie Kondo'd your sock drawer, and you have felt very accomplished in doing it for about 11 days. So the problem isn't the organizational or decluttering skills that you don't have, because you have them. The problem is that a lot of us have a bin or a closet or a drawer or an entire spare room full of things that we can't seem to make a decision about, no matter how many different organizing systems or tools or methods or step-by-step processes we throw at it. And I'm fairly certain that that's because the thing that's sitting right in front of you isn't actually the problem. The room, the box, the bin, it's just evidence of the problem. And that's what we're talking about today. Well, if you've ever stood in your house and looked at something that you've moved from place to place, or maybe you've reorganized it a million times, you've packed it away, or you're looking at something that you've promised yourself you'd deal with that later, I have a question for you. What if you don't actually have an organization problem? Because sometimes the things we can't seem to make decisions about aren't really about the stuff. They're holding an old version of us, a person we love, or money that we feel guilty about having spent. Or maybe they represent a season that we're not quite ready to admit is over. And sometimes our house has simply become full of decisions that we've been too overwhelmed or busy to make. That's why I created Honest Conversations About Clutter. This isn't another decluttering challenge or organizing system. It's a completely different conversation about why we keep what we keep and what our stuff may be actually trying to tell us. We'll talk about identity and love and guilt and grief and all those postponed decisions. And I'll help you figure out what deserves space in the life and home that you're living in now. If you're ready to stop asking, why can't I just get rid of this, and finally understand what's underneath it, Honest Conversations About Clutter is for you. Well, hey friend, I am Jennifer Roskamp, and I want to welcome you to the conversation today. If this is your first time here, I help women stop white-knuckling their way through their days and start living their life on purpose, with intention, spending some of their time, their energy, and their resources on at least some of the things that they actually want to spend it on. We do a lot of mindset work. I've got real life strategies here, and it actually holds up when life gets loud or messy. So today we're talking about clutter, but probably not the way that you're used to hearing it talked about. I'm not going to tell you about bins or to give you a 30-day challenge. I want to go really a layer underneath all of that stuff. because I don't think that most women listening here have a knowledge problem when it comes to your stuff. You know how to get rid of things. But what you don't have is clarity about why certain things feel impossible to get rid of. So here's my promise to you for our time here today. By the end of our time today, I want you to be able to answer and really to be able to look at something that you've struggled with, some sort of item, and you've maybe tried to pick it up and work with it. You've moved it around 45 times, right? And every time you stop asking, you keep asking yourself, why can't I just get rid of this after you put it back down? And we're going to start answering and asking a completely different question. Instead of saying, why can't I just get rid of this? I want you to ask, what is carrying this or continuing to hang on to this doing for me? What is it holding on to for me? What am I connected to when it comes to this thing? Because clutter can be information. It can be pointing to identity. It can be pointing to love or guilt or grief. Or simply, it could be that you are a woman who has run out of capacity to make yet another decision today. And once you know what is actually underneath the object, using the things that we talk about today, you can make a different decision from a point of clarity and not from a place of shame. We usually try to shame ourselves into just getting rid of stuff, and we don't make very good decisions when we're shaming ourselves. So let's get into it for today. So I want to talk about something before we go further, because I think I know a lot of women carry kind of this quiet shame about this topic, about clutter, and nobody is talking about it out loud. There are women who are walking around their own homes right now, and they're thinking, I should have this under control. Why can't I keep up with this? How did my house get so bad? What's wrong with me that I can't just deal with this bin or this one room? And here's what happens when those are the thoughts that you have constantly running about your stuff on repeat. A physical problem quietly turns into an identity problem. You're no longer dealing with that crowded closet or that bin of stuff or that room full of stuff. You've decided that the closet or the bin or the room full of stuff, it says something about you as the person. It says that you're disorganized or that you're behind, or that if you were really able to pull your life together, this wouldn't still be sitting here. And it really is that identity belief that I want to interrupt here today, because it's not true, but it's also not helpful. And in reality, I know that you don't need another reason to feel like you're failing at something. We already, as women, have enough self-talk that does that to us. And so we need a better question then when it comes to dealing with that stuff. And so here really is the shift that I want you to make. Instead of starting with, why should I keep this? I want you to go one layer beneath that. And we want to be able to ask, why has it been so hard for me to decide about this item, right? Because that's where the useful information that is going to help us deal with it actually lives. Sometimes the object that's actually sitting in front of you is carrying something that you can't actually physically see with your eyes, right? It might be carrying identity. It might be carrying love. It might be carrying guilt. It might be carrying grief. Or it might simply be this unmade, unfinished decision that's been sitting here so long that it's grown roots. And each one of these is a completely different conversation that we're going to be having here today. Because each one of these different things that it might be tied to, your stuff, your bin, your room, each item, why it is that it's tethered to you depends. The solution depends on why it's tethered to you. And so we're going to have 5 different conversations that will highlight the 5 different tethers that we really could be dealing with here. Okay? So conversation 1 is that sometimes the stuff is holding an identity. Now, what do I mean by that? This one, I think, is especially prevalent in midlife, because by this point in life, you've accumulated belongings from a lot of different versions of yourself or a lot of different seasons of your life, right? There was when you were the young mom, there was the career woman, there was you in a different body, there was the woman with little kids who were underfoot, there was the woman who entertained constantly and had a whole cabinet of serving dishes to prove that. It was the woman who thought she was going to become a scrapbooker or a runner. It was the woman who bought the exercise equipment because this year, this was finally going to be the year. And some of what's sitting in your garage or your basement, it doesn't represent at all who you are right now. It represents who you were, or perhaps who you thought you would become, but never quite did. Think about the clothes in your closet that haven't fit for 10 years, right? There's the business clothes from a career that you left behind. There's the baby gear that you still have, even though your kids have grown. There's the craft supplies from the hobby that you never actually enjoyed, but just felt like you were supposed to enjoy it. There's the books from the subject that you wanted to learn more about. There's the equipment for the activity that just doesn't fit your life anymore. And when it comes to those things in our stuff, here's the reframe that I really want to offer you. Maybe you're actually not deciding whether to keep a dress or a pair of workout shoes. Maybe what you're actually deciding is whether you're ready to stop measuring today's version of you, who you are today, against the woman who once wore it or was positive that she would. It becomes a much harder decision at that point than the decision we expect ourselves to make, which is, do I keep this item or do I donate it? There's a lot more to that decision, and it deserves to be recognized, and the decision needs to be treated like it's a little bit more weighty than just, should I keep it or should I toss it? Now, I've said this before, and I'll say it again because it matters more here in this conversation than maybe anywhere else you've heard me say it. Transformation is essentially what I help women do, right? I help them step into becoming the women that they actually want to be. I help them spend their resources, their capacity, their bandwidth, their energy, their time, their ability to focus, all of those things on at least some of the things that actually matter to them, instead of just kind of being a slave to all of the have-to things that we all can so easily get caught up in. Transformation is when we move from who we have just kind of been along for the ride and we step into who we actually want to be, again, with some of our resources being spent on the people and the things that actually matter to us. But transformation, it's not necessarily about becoming someone new. A lot of the work that I do with women is about reconnecting with who you are right now. We lose sight of that so easily. And I also help women stop kind of quietly measuring themselves against an old identity that they've outgrown, or again, an identity that they never really fit into in the first place. And so when it comes to this stuff, a really good question to start with is, who does this object represent? And am I asking myself to be her? So here's how to put this into practice. So pick one item that was connected to a former identity, okay? Just one. And ask yourself, does keeping this help me honor who I have been, or does it pressure me to become her again? Those are not the same thing, and the difference matters a whole lot. So let me give you an example. I have a client who kept a rack of business suits in her closet for almost 6 years after she stopped working in that office. She wasn't wearing them. She wasn't going back to that job. But every time she opened the closet, there they were. And it was this silent reminder of a version of her life that was very different, and a version of her life that she enjoyed. Not that she didn't enjoy her life now, because she did, but she did also enjoy that one. That was a season of her life where she had a title and she earned a paycheck and she had a clear sense of who she was supposed to be. And so getting rid of the suits had nothing to do with the suits themselves. It wasn't about the fabric. It wasn't about the style. It even wasn't about how they fit her or didn't fit her anymore. It was about grieving a version of herself in her life that she hadn't really let go of yet. And so that's what we worked on. We worked on identifying what is really going on with these suits. And we figured out it was that attachment to that previous season and that previous version of herself. And she hadn't really let go of that or grieved that. And so we went through the letting go process and we went through the emotional kind of grieving process. And once we did that, there was no problem getting rid of the suits. But I know that those suits would still be in her closet today if we hadn't gotten to the bottom of why they were there, why they were so hard for her to get rid of. And then processing through what we figured out. And once we figured it out, it became easy. I mean, don't we want our clutter to be easy? This is the key. This is the secret for you. You need to figure out why it's hard for you to get rid of this stuff. Okay, so that was conversation one, is that it was tied to an identity. Conversation number 2 that we're going to have is that sometimes we confuse keeping the things, the items, with preserving the relationship or keeping the love. Okay, now this one is one we're going to take just a little bit slower because we're talking about things like your mother's dishes or your grandmother's china or your dad's tools or your child's artwork from all of those school years. The pictures that nobody has looked at since you boxed them up. The Christmas decorations that your kids made when they were little and you haven't used anymore. The handwritten notes, right? These are things that belonged to people we love. They were things that were given to us by people that we love. And that makes them hard to deal with. Here's what I've noticed with so many of the women that I work with. Somewhere along the way, a lot of times we women become the archives, right? We become the women, the people who archive all of the memories, who keep all of the things, right? Usually nobody officially comes to us and says, hey, can you be the keeper of all of these things? But we just kind of step into that. It just kind of happens. We kind of become the ones who are responsible for preserving everybody's history, right? Your mother's history, your grandmother's history, sometimes her in-laws' history. And we feel this pressure to preserve our entire kids' childhood because we love our kids. And we keep all of these things boxed and maybe even labeled and well organized. Because if I don't keep this stuff, who's going to hang on to it? Who is going to keep it if I'm not? And what does it say about me if I get rid of it? Those are 2 really hard things that we wrestle with. But here's the thing. You can love the person that is attached to that thing without assuming lifetime responsibility for everything that that person has ever touched or that you have been given by that person. And then there's kind of this interesting thing, right? I'm not saying that we should get rid of all the stuff, okay? First of all, let me say that. Hear this clearly. But really what happens is we have really, when it comes to our stuff, if we're confusing keeping the stuff with the relationship and the love that we have for this person, usually we boil our decision down to 2 options. We're going to either keep everything, which apparently means that I care, or I'm going to get rid of everything, which apparently means that I don't care. I don't care about that person. I don't care about that time in my life. I don't care about the relationship. But in reality, there is an enormous amount of room between those 2 extremes. And most of us have never, number one, acknowledged that there's a lot of space there, but we also haven't allowed ourselves to be in that space there. It's either one or the other. I'm going to get rid of stuff, but that means you don't care, or I'm going to hang on to stuff because I have to do that in order to know that I care, right? So if this is a conversation that you need to have with yourself, if you know that this stuff, some of your stuff, is tied to this preserving of the love in the relationship, ask yourself, what is it that I actually treasure? What has value to me? Would keeping this object, would not keeping this object, here's the better way to say it, would not keeping this object do something to that relationship, to the meaning that that person had? And what about this? When we've got all of these boxes of things that are just sitting in boxes, what if we were to ask, would one meaningful object from this box, from my mother's china collection or whatever it might be, would one meaningful item that is either displayed or seen or actually used and enjoyed, would that be enough for me? And would that preserve the stories and the memories that I'm working so hard to preserve? Would that actually preserve them better than 20 objects would, sitting in a box, labeled, never seen, enjoyed, or used by anyone? I mean, would I rather look at 3 things and be reminded of the love? Or would I rather store 40 things that I feel obligated to store? Is that going to give me more tangible strongholds to that person or that relationship or that time in my life? So here's your practical takeaway for this conversation. Don't only ask, was this item important to another person? Or was this item important during another phase of my life or in a different season of my life? And ask, is this meaningful to me right now? Because if you skip that second question, what happens is we pass these generational things from one generation to another, right? One generation's belongings become the next generation's obligation. And I don't think any one of us want to do that for our kids. And I do think about this with my own kids sometimes, right? Like, I don't want them standing in my garage or looking in my closet someday exhausted, sorting through all the boxes. And they don't know what to do with the stuff. And they're battling with their own guilt and their own conflicted emotions because they've got the guilt and they've got the love and they feel inclined to keep things that they never even liked because they're afraid of what it means if they don't keep it, right? If I want to leave them something, I'd rather it be a few things that actually mattered, that were displayed and that were used, especially if they're coming from my mom or my grandmother or, my family line in some way. I would like them to keep some of these things because they were displayed and used and remembered in their lives too. But that's not going to happen if they're sitting in boxes and bins and storage units. We don't want anyone feeling obligated to protect a storage unit. Conversation 3. Sometimes this stuff is holding guilt. Now, this one's a little bit easier because it's a little bit more familiar, I think, to us, because when I get there in a second, you're going to recognize yourself immediately. So, you know the lines that you probably tell yourself, right? When you think about getting rid of something, but there's this voice that creeps in and it says, but it was expensive, or it was a gift, or there's nothing actually wrong with it. Why would you get rid of it? Or someone could use it, or I might need it someday. I really should finish that. I don't want to be wasteful. And of course, the classic one, I paid good money for that. Yes, you did. Yes, you did to all of it. And yes, all of those things can be true. But here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. The money is already gone. Keeping the item doesn't get it back. Sometimes keeping it really just means that you're still paying for it, just not with dollars anymore, but with space and with attention and with mental energy and with this quiet underlying current of guilt every time you walk past it. But let's go deeper here, because I don't think that that's what's actually going on necessarily either. Sometimes we're holding on to the expectation that was attached to the purchase, not the purchase itself. So, for example, the treadmill wasn't just a treadmill purchase. It now is attached to the expectation that I should exercise more. The expensive craft supplies aren't really the craft supplies. What we're zeroed in on is this expectation that said, I should be the kind of person who finishes what she starts. The unread books aren't just books. They're I should be this kind of person who reads this book and learns these things. That's the expectation. The kitchen gadget isn't just a kitchen gadget. It's I should cook at home more often than I do expectation. See what I mean? And here's what I really want you to take. I really want this to be something that sticks. Sometimes we're not storing possessions, we're storing shoulds. And if that hits a nerve, I want you to notice that, because it connects to something that I think a lot of us already struggle with. There's this, again, constant undercurrent of guilt and pressure, and the belief that you should be doing more, and I should be more, and I should be keeping up more. Here's a question that I would ask you if you were my client and we were texting. I would ask you to ask yourself, if nobody knew that I owned this, would I still choose to keep it? Nobody knew that you had the kitchen gadget so that you'd cook more, right? Nobody knew that you had the treadmill because you wanted to get in shape, right? Like, what? Just sit with that for a second. It's really a fascinating test, that question. And it tends to be more honest than many of the other questions that you could ask yourself about your stuff, especially when it comes to the typical decluttering stuff that you hear. Because so many of the things that we keep, they aren't actually for us. They're for the version of ourselves that we're afraid someone else is judging, right? It's the mother-in-law who gave you the gift. It's the friend who would notice if you got rid of that. It's the version of yourself from 5 years ago who swore that she'd finish the project. None of those people are standing in your closet or in that storage space with you right now. You are standing there. And you get to decide what stays based on your life and what works for you, not their expectations. Conversation 4. Sometimes clutter is delayed grief. Now, this is the part of the conversation that is really relevant to me. And we're going to go again a little bit slower through this one because this is the emotional center of everything we're talking about today. Clutter carries a lot of emotion, much of the time. And the truth is that there are things that we aren't avoiding because we're disorganized. We are avoiding them because touching them makes something real for us that we aren't ready to make real yet. Could be the clothes of someone who passed away, the belongings that were left after a divorce, the medical paperwork from a horrible year that you just can't bring yourself to enter into again in any way. Your children's things after they've moved out and the house went quiet and you weren't ready for that. You didn't know that that was going to happen. Baby clothes. When you know you're not going to have another baby, this is me. Things connected to a friendship that just quietly drifted apart. Things that were connected to the family you thought you'd have by now. Things connected to the life that you expected to be living at this point, but it never actually became the life that you lived. Sometimes the hardest thing about getting rid of an object isn't about the object at all. It's admitting that the season connected to that item is over. And that brings with it grief. That makes these things about grief, not about the things. And this is true even when the season was beautiful, maybe especially when the season was beautiful. There's going to be grief there. And I want to be careful because this isn't the part of the conversation where I tell you, okay, it's grief. Come on, just get over it and get rid of it, right? That's not what I'm doing. But I also don't want to leave you trapped indefinitely because that's not going to be helpful for you either. My whole approach in the things that I do, and especially when it comes to women with clutter, is identity. It's helping you take ownership. That's probably a better word. It's helping you take ownership without shame. And when it comes to your stuff, when you know that there's emotions wrapped up into it, compassion is really important. But so is eventually taking responsibility for what comes next. So both of these things are true at the same time. Yes, there is grief there. There is sadness there that is attached to that item. But it's also true at the same time that it doesn't mean you have to keep it for forever, right? And I think it's also important to note that when it comes to grief, whether we're talking about clutter and the grief of our clutter or grief in general, we shouldn't ever have to force processing through grief. Nobody else should be able to tell us our timeline for dealing with grief. No one can decide that for you, but it's also important to note that you don't have to turn your home or allow your home to be this permanent holding place for grief that you're too afraid to touch. At some point, we need to get over the fear of that grief and get into it and start processing it. Now, sometimes you need help with this, right? Sometimes you need someone to come alongside you in this. Sometimes you just simply need more time than you've given yourself. Now that you understand why it's there, give yourself some time to work through the grieving process. Sometimes you just genuinely need to sit on the floor and just cry for a while before you can make a decision about any of this stuff. Sometimes you need to preserve the story about that thing. Sometimes you need to tell that story to someone or even just to yourself. Maybe you need to journal about that. But sometimes you need to do that before you're ready to release the things that are tied to it. Here's the question that I think will be really helpful if you know that emotions are wrapped up. What ending would I have to acknowledge if I let this go? What would I have to acknowledge happened in order for me to let this go? Now, know that question might hit you squarely between your eyes. It could feel like a sucker punch in your gut. It could feel like a knife right through your heart. That's okay. Just let it be there. Let it just give that emotional response the space it needs for you to be able to just kind of hold it for a little bit. You don't have to answer the question. You don't have to answer the question about what do I have to acknowledge has ended. If it brings up emotion, just sit with that first. Allow that. Give those feelings and emotions space before you actually move on and answer that question. And answering that question is going to be how you start processing through, because now I'm understanding. I'm allowing myself, I have processed the grief and I'm allowing myself to acknowledge what has ended. And now that I have kind of that clear view of rounding the corner because life has moved on and now so have I. Again, that will make releasing this stuff a whole lot easier than it ever has been for you, especially if you've never thought, never realized, no one's ever told you that there can be emotional connections and ties to your stuff in this way. So conversation 5, sometimes your house is full of postponed decisions. So now we're going to shift gears, right? Because not everything in your home is sentimental. There's going to be plenty of stuff in your house wrapped up in your clutter that isn't at all sentimental or emotional for you in any way. So what about that, right? Some of it is just truly stuff, but you just haven't decided about the stuff. Now, this is where the capacity piece, the capacity work that I do, I often talk about capacity here with you guys. This is where capacity becomes really important and why I'm talking about it and why I address it pretty much every day with pretty much every one of my clients somewhere. Capacity work becomes really important because then your clutter and your stuff, if capacity is to blame, it's not an organizational problem like you may have thought. It's a decision problem if you're at capacity. If you know that you're burning the candle at both ends and have for a while and you've got clutter, it's a decision problem that's happening. Hands down, that's what's happening. You've spent years being the one who holds everything together. You're the one making the decisions all day long, every single day. What are we eating tonight? Who's driving to practice? Did somebody actually schedule that appointment? When does that bill need to get paid? What are we doing this weekend? Did you call your mother back? Does the dog need something? What in the world are we going to do about college, right? And then you walk into your kitchen and there's this random stuff sitting on your kitchen counter. And it's basically looking at you and asking, what are you going to do with me? And you think, nope, not happening. Not happening today. Maybe tomorrow I can deal with it. And it just continues in that way, right? But here's the line that I really want you to hold on to in this case. Your house can become, and our homes often do become, full of postponed decisions. The bag that needs to go to Goodwill, the item that you need to return, the paperwork you keep meaning to file, the broken lamp you're eventually going to fix, the things that someone else needs to come pick up from you, the clothes you're still deciding about, the project that you're absolutely for sure going to finish someday. Each one of those is an open loop that is quietly running in the background of your mind and in your life every day. It's knowing that you need to make a decision, right? That stuff, it's saying keep me or move me or fix me or return me or donate me or finish me or deal with me. And eventually your physical environment then just becomes this visual representation of every decision that you haven't had the capacity to make. And it's there's a really important distinction that I need to make here, because a lot of women hear clutter and immediately jump to, I'm bad at organizing, but that could absolutely not be true. You could actually just be bad at decision making. And so you could, again, have that decision backlog, because if that's what's actually going on, you can see how the solution isn't going to be better containers or a new labeling system. The solution is actually reducing the number of open decisions and open loops that you have going on at any one time. So here's your practical takeaway if this conversation is one that you know you need to have. This is one that spoke to you. Pick 10 visible things in your house that don't belong where they currently are, okay? The ones that you know are just stuff. Don't organize them, just decide about them. Keep, move, give away, trash, repair, recycle. With an actual deadline attached, not a vague, I'll do it, or I'll get to it, or someday. Return, finish, release, whatever it is, 10 decisions. It's not about how much stuff you move. It's about building your decision muscle when it comes to clutter. I do 3-hour clutter intensives with women where this is what our focus is. And we're not measuring success by how different their room looks when we're done with the 3 hours. And what they gain isn't what they see visually. What they gain during those 3 hours is repeatedly making decisions about their stuff. They have made hundreds of decisions by the time we're done with the 3 hours about their stuff. They have built their decision muscles. That's what they gain. And that's what you can gain too when you practice making decisions. You are carrying probably far more open loops than you realize, and for sure that anyone sees, because these are invisible things. It's the appointments, and it's the forms, and it's the permission slips, and it's the follow-up text, and it's the things that you said you would handle. The visible clutter is just the outcome, the result of all of the backlog that you can't actually see, which means that clearing the stuff, it isn't a matter of being tidy or tidying up. It's a completely different starting point when we realize it's decisions that I have to make. And this is when we understand this concept, it makes all of the other decluttering step-by-step processes or strategies kind of null and void, because the decision has to come before moving the object. And so the decision is what we're focusing on first. So I want to be really clear about something before we kind of wrap things up for today. I don't want this conversation to become another permission slip to avoid making a decision about your stuff because you now understand what's going on, right? Understanding why you're holding on to something doesn't automatically mean that you should still continue hanging on to it. That compassionate understanding that I asked you to kind of have with yourself, and that we have this compassionate understanding, while it can explain why you have the stuff, it doesn't have to be a permission slip to preserve it still being there indefinitely, right? We're not going to shame ourselves into getting rid of things, but we're also not going to expect that just because we understand that there's a reason that it's there, that it should stay. Lasting change and taking care of clutter and keeping it from coming back never comes from a place of shame. And it certainly doesn't come when we understand why it's hard for us to get rid of things, and again, use that as a permission slip to keep it. And so the question kind of underneath everything that we've talked about today, we aren't asking, was this ever useful to me? Or did this ever matter to me? Or did I pay good money for it? Or might I use it someday? Or does someone else think I should keep it? None of those are the questions we want to be asking. We want to ask, does this deserve space in the life that I'm living right now? That's the question. That's what it looks like to make a decision. That's what it looks like to make a decision from a place of intentionality, not from shame, not from true justifications. That's what it looks like to be in the driver's seat. I talk about this with women all the time, how important it is to be in the driver's seat in your life and in the everyday things that you do, where you are the one who is actively involved, not in the back seat where you're just along for the ride and thinking that this is just the way it is. And I'm powerless to do anything about my circumstances, right? So let's not think about decluttering an entire bin even, because that's probably not even realistic. That probably feels like too much if clutter has been a problem for a while. But I want you to pick one object. Here's how to make this practical. Here's your assignment from me. Pick just one item, something that you know you've repeatedly struggled to make a decision about. You've thought about it, you've tried it, you've never really been able to do anything with it, right? In my example, it's your version of the bin of baby clothes. That's what I'm asking you to find. One thing, okay? And then these are kind of some pre-questions to ask yourself that is going to help you. Answering these questions are going to be able to help you confidently answer, does this deserve space in the life I'm living right now? Okay? Question number 1, what does this represent to me? Question number 2, what am I afraid it would mean if I let it go, right? So maybe you would answer, if I were to answer these about the bin of baby clothes, what does this represent to me? It represents when I had young kids and when there was the excitement of my family always growing. And what is that going to look like ultimately? That's what those things represent. What am I afraid it would mean if I let it go? I'm afraid I would have to face that part of my life is over. I know it cognitively, but I would have to actually feel that emotionally. And I haven't done that yet. Question number 3, what am I actively trying to preserve? Now, is it identity? Is it love? Is it security? Is it memories? Is it possibility? Right? When I think about the baby clothes, I'm trying to preserve probably a mix of identity and love. Question number 4, can I preserve that, in my example, identity and love, without keeping this particular thing? Will I still have the identity? Will I still have that connection to the identity? Will I still have the love if I get rid of the stuff? And then, knowing all of these things that I just answered for myself, does this deserve space in the life that I'm living right now? And then you've made the decision. You know the answer. When you've asked that question, you answer the question and you make the decision that naturally follows the answer that you came up with. Don't let this be another thing that you overthink and go back and forth with and question. You don't need to journal about it, okay? One object, one honest conversation with yourself, and one decision made. That's how you start gaining ground on your clutter. It's making one decision at a time. And every time that you make the decision about one item, you are building your decision-making muscles and you are collecting evidence that, you know what, might be different from the evidence you've been collecting for decades if you've had some of this stuff for decades. You're going to start collecting evidence that says, you know what, I can make decisions about this stuff. You know what, I can deal with this stuff. You know what, I can get rid of some of this stuff. But it happens one decision at a time. It's not even about moving one item at a time. It's not about whether you decide to put this item in the donate box or the sell box or the trash pile or whatever it is. It's about what happened before you moved it there. Because whether or not you realize it, anytime you've taken care of any clutter, done anything with it at all, you always did the same thing first. Step 1 is always making the decision. And that's what we're focused on now. We're not focused on the stuff. We're focused on understanding the stuff so that the decision becomes easier to make. So let me give you 4 key takeaways to make sure you have today, okay? Number 1, your clutter is information, not a character flaw. The things you can't seem to decide about are usually carrying something. You're holding on to them for something. It's identity, it's love, it's guilt, it's grief. And once you are able to name what it is, what you're actually holding, because it's not the thing, it's what it's tied to, making the decision gets a lot easier. Takeaway number 2, loving someone doesn't obligate you to keep everything that they've ever touched. It doesn't define your relationship or their meaning. You get to choose the objects that actually become what you want to preserve. And then let go of the rest of the stuff. And it doesn't have to mean that you loved them any less, or that relationship or that season was any less meaningful to you. It does not mean that. But man, we think that. Takeaway number 3, understanding an object's meaning doesn't require you to keep it. Compassion can explain why something is still there and why it's been hard for you to get rid of. But it doesn't have to be a permission slip to continue hanging on to it for forever. Takeaway number 4, a cluttered space is often a decision backlog, not a discipline problem. You don't need a better organizing system nearly as much as you need to close 10 loops. And the more open loops you have, the more this is probably going to be a really good conversation 5 for you to start on. Because you need to close some of those open loops. And so you're going to do that with 1 and 10 simple things if that's your clutter language. Clutter connection, let's call it that. If that's your clutter connection, it's 10 things. And you're going to decide, am I going to keep it? Am I going to move it somewhere else? Am I going to give it away? Does it go in the trash? Does it belong in the donate pile? Does it need to be repaired? Does it need to be returned? Is it something I need to finish? Or is it something I just need to let go of? Make 10 decisions and you'll feel some capacity start to appear. You'll feel some lightness in your brain. It's amazing how when we start closing loops, we can actually physically feel it. So here's what I want you to remember. Your home does not have to become a storage facility for every version of you that has ever existed or for everything that has ever had meaning to you. Your home doesn't have to hold on to every dream or every memory that you've ever had. It doesn't have to hold on to every dollar spent or every gift that you've ever received or every person that you've ever loved or every season that you've ever survived or every decision that you haven't quite gotten around to making yet. You can honor what something meant to you without giving it permanent residence in your home and in your life. So the next time you're standing in front of your stuff and you're thinking, why can't I just get rid of this? I don't want you to judge yourself. Usually that's what we're doing. Just get curious instead. What is this carrying? Why am I holding on to this? Is it identity? Is it love? Is it guilt? Is it grief? Or am I just simply too overloaded to make a decision right now? And once you know, don't stop there. Once you know the answer, then make the decision. If this conversation has really hit home for you, I built a free resource for you. And it's called the Clutter Check-In, and it will walk you through this process that we went through today so that you're not having to remember it on your own. You can get it at midlifeclutterhelp.com or check the notes below. Friend, I am so glad that you joined me here today. We talk about clutter here every single Tuesday. And I'd love to have you back. And hey, if you know someone who needs to hear this message just as much as you did, please share it with them. You can be her new best friend. So just share this conversation with anyone you know who needs it. Friend, one thing, that's your challenge from me. Now go do it.